All right, so people keep telling me if the scientific method is so bad, why don't you come up with a better method? All right, so that's what we're going to try to do here. This is called the truth-seeking method. So why is this truth-seeking method so much better than science? Well, unlike science, the truth-seeking method is subject to challenge. So the way the truth-seeking method works is you get a whole bunch of intellectuals to design their principles for experimentation and truth-seeking, and you actually compare what works. Okay, so we find which of these truth-seeking methods produces the highest accuracy, which of them produces the highest, time efficiency, which of them produces the best cost efficiency, and we actually compare these things, right? So unlike science, where we just say it's the best, we actually try to get evidence for which one is in fact the best. And we're going to find that some methods produce better cost efficiency and some produce better accuracy. So that's the first premise here. Now, the second premise is is the philosophical foundation of the truth method. The truth method involves logic and evidence, and in order to discern what reality is, there's three ways. You can have bomb-proof, simple logic with no significant contradicting evidence, or you can have bomb-proof, simple evidence with no significant contradicting logic. Or you can have a combination of very strong logic and very strong evidence. And number three is probably the one we're going to be using the most, because a lot of things like in science and the stuff that we're interested in isn't so simple that you can just have like a really simple observation or really simple logic to decide something. Okay, so I say it's a lot like making a computer program. We can be confident it's a good program when hundreds of people have extensively tested it in a variety of circumstances, and we have incredibly strong evidence that it does in fact work. And we also have really good logic, and we evaluate all this logic. It's very organized, it's very simple, it's very precise, and nobody can really find any flaw in this logic. Okay, that's how we know we got something good going on here. All right. Now, all of this part up to here is mandatory. Everything here is mandatory, and the rest is not mandatory. And I have what's called general principles for objectivity. So this is an ever-evolving list that changes and should be generally followed, but is not mandatory again, all right? And the reason why it's not mandatory is to allow for more creativity and efficiency. Some of these processes aren't necessarily relevant to a certain experiment, so we shouldn't just follow a process because it's on the list. It should actually be relevant and apply to what the person is doing, okay? So the first big change I want to do is to make the quest for truth emotionally and psychologically deep. So what does that mean? Okay, a lot of people don't like the sound of that. This means we should be trying to understand the motivations and psychology of the experimenter. And here is a list of some really big fundamental biases that we should be very concerned about when we do any experiment. So funding, corruption, and financial motivations. We should care about pride, ego, and social status. You know, people want to be like this famous big think Newton guy, right? Well, that's going to give people a bias in what they do. They're going to want to be right, okay? Conformity, reputation, and social pressures. These are gigantic human biases. Ideological, religious, and political biases, and legal pressures, okay? So certain research might have some kind of legal ramifications if you find a certain result or not, right? So this is just a general list, and I'm sure you would find psychologists who disagree with my list. They'd say, Cliff, you missed this gigantic bias right here, or this bias you're saying isn't as big as you think it is, okay? Generally, people don't have so much problem with that bias. And you know, they're probably right. I'm sure there are psychologists who could find flaws with my list or big things that I missed on my list, right? This is by no means a perfect draft. It's something I wrote in 11 minutes, okay? As the field of psychology evolves, we should pay careful attention and be aware of human motivations and how to counteract these problems in human motivations, okay? So in general, experiments should be done somewhat like a court with a lawyer and a prosecutor. So this is another idea I have for objectivity. I think this is one good thing the legal system has, which is you have an automatic skepticism, okay? So whenever you have someone trying to prove that this tape causes cancer, you should have another guy trying to prove that that dude is full of crap, all right? So they should be like, no, Clearly, you have financial bias here. Clearly, you have ideological bias. You manipulated data on point 3, 4, and 7, et cetera, et cetera. You know, you're abusing and twisting statistics, et cetera, right? We should have auto-skepticism involved. Next, we get into the successes of the scientific method. There's some good ideas in science, and we should incorporate these good ideas, like recording your experiments carefully in detail, isolating variables, replication, that is super, super important, falsifiability, recognizing general established patterns and philosophies in science, such as the laws of science, right, and the successes of these laws. We should have blindfolded tests, you know, meta-analysis. These are some good principles in science. And not all the principles of science are necessarily good, but a lot of them are. And we should use the ones that are good and producing good results, okay? So we don't have to completely reject science by any means. We should incorporate a lot of science into this method. The next thing about this method is defining things clearly. There needs to be an official doctrine where this method is clearly recorded so people can challenge and falsify it, right? Unlike the scientific method, this one is very clearly defined. We have all our mandatory rules and we have our general principles for objectivity. And at any time, somebody can challenge this and try to find flaw with it. I think that's really important. The more people do that, the stronger this method becomes, right? The next thing is clear communication. It's kind of similar to defining things clearly. We need to communicate ideas clearly and simply, so we want as little technical jargon as we can. And we want to try to generally democratize what we're saying as much as we can, right? So if you don't need to use a term like a priori reasoning, we can just say something like, you know, logical reasoning. Well, way more people understand logical reasoning. So that's a big thing, you know, subscribing to that is good. We should use dictionaries, right? We should not use custom definitions to words, right? Everything should be as communicable as possible. We want very good, strong communication. Next, I think there should be some kind of penalty for publishing wrong information, okay? So people should be extremely confident about their results before publishing them, right? I think that's a good thing. And, you know, if this skeptic guy is still raising valid criticisms to your experiment, you definitely shouldn't publish it yet, right? Wait till it's, you know, all the skepticism has been resolved. Wait till you have independent replication. Wait till you're totally sure and you've bomb-proof tested this idea, right? And you have rock solid idea, then you can publish it, right? And maybe you should also have a reward for being right. You know, if you have a penalty for being wrong, you should also get a reward for being right, okay? And I'm not saying people should be like, you know, shot for being wrong or something, right? But maybe they can, like, their status as a scientist can go down. They get like a down vote each time they're wrong and an up vote each time they're right. So their reputation can go up or down like this. So next thing is I want to have like more connection from the outside world to the intellectual world. So the intellectual world often withdraws from the outside world, but lots of great ideas are created by independent intellectuals. And there shouldn't be this like barrier between, you know, independent intellectuals and the academy. The academy should be interested in what independent intellectuals are finding and discovering, right? Anyone should be able to present ideas, right? Lastly, I say we should have an entire field devoted to objective experimentation. We should always be kind of experimenting experiments itself. It should be called meta-experimentation, right? Where we're experimenting to figure out how to make better experiments, right? I think that could be a whole new field, which would be pretty cool, and figure out a lot of useful things to update this method. Now, lastly, I say in the method, we should recognize the limitations of the first draft. You would have to be an idiot to actually use this method that I've wrote, because I wrote this thing in about 10 minutes. It needs a lot of revision. You know, if I spent 11 or 12 minutes, I'd probably already have found some flaw in like my general principles for objectivity. So, making something better than this would be good, but it's a good first start, you know. Science does not mandate the use of logic, so we can have any kind of really crazy, wacky idea calling it science, and that's fine, you know. And science does not mandate the use of evidence, so you can have something like the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is literally an unfalsifiable claim. You know, this contradicts like general principles of science, but it's not mandated. So you're allowed to have something with absolutely zero evidence, even when it's a very complicated thing, which you would totally need evidence to prove, right? So the foundation solves most of these problems in science, and the general principles for objectivity are really looking at the biggest failure of science, which I think is to look more at the experimenter. Science focuses very well on the experiments, but not so well on the experimenter.